Is the founder of BKD, a New York and Turkey-based architecture and design firm, and we're lucky enough to have him here for the past week and a half. He's here for a few more days as one of our current artists in residence. And so he's going to be speaking with Setha. Setha Low is a distinguished professor of, I believe, she has a lot that she does, a distinguished professor of environmental psychology, geography, anthropology, and women's studies, as well as being the director of public space research group at the Graduate Center, SUNY University of New York. So together they're going to speak a little bit about public spaces, the way that they can be activated, how we can come together as a community to really utilize them, and they have a really interesting presentation prepared. Following the talk, Koray and Setha have prepared a fantastic dinner, so we invite you all to join us down in the garden of the church for a community-based meal, building on what we have here. And I just want to give a quick shout out to two of our other artists in residence right now, Allison Cinnamon and Rayos Magos. They are going to be hosting an open studio tomorrow afternoon from 12 to 2 down on the studio level. So if you're around and you're interested in stopping by, please do. We are also going to have a book swap tomorrow and Sunday, as well as a talk on Sunday with April Gornick. So a lot coming up at the church, always a lot to do here, but thank you for coming out tonight. Without further ado, I'm going to hand it off to Koray and Setha.
Hello. Yep, it's working.
Hi.
Thank you so much for everybody to come in this lovely day, and thank you so much for the church for hosting us. It's been a great 10 days for me. As Sam said, I'm an architect. I have a firm in New York, and most of our projects are in arts and culture. We work with museums, nonprofits, artists, but at the same time, I have this great ongoing interest about public space. And this was a great opportunity to come here to think about it for the past 10 days, so the talk will be about that. And a few months ago, I was talking about what I can do here to work on and think about. Sherry, the executive director of church, was very generous to introduce me to Setha, and we had a really lovely conversation before I start the residency. So I thought that it would be great for us to kind of present our work and have a conversation, hopefully, with you. What I'm going to do is that I'm going to kind of set the tone with a brief introduction. Then Setha will talk about her work, and then I will show some projects. Hopefully it just makes sense, everything. And after that, we'll have a conversation together.
I'm going to go down there so I can see.
All right. And just to make it a little bit more smooth, I'm just going to read some of the thoughts that I have. So I hope you don't mind. Of course, the talk that we're having today is about spaces of generosity. And it's kind of interesting. I just immediately look at what generosity means. And nowadays we have this thing called AI overview immediately comes up about the definitions, which I kind of like. And the definition came as generosity at its core is the willingness to give freely, often beyond what's expected, and without expecting anything in return. It involves acts of kindness, compassion, and selflessness, whether through sharing material possessions, time, attention, or emotional support. True generosity goes beyond simply giving. It's about the spirit and intention behind the act, aiming to enhance the well-being of others and strangers. Which that last sentence was something that I think about a lot, because I immigrated to the United States from Turkey in 1998 at the age of 22 to pursue my graduate studies in Los Angeles. And I usually think about it a lot because as an immigrant, we naturally start our lives as a guest, a stranger, or the other, trying to set up a new life. And for a while, there's very little to give back, and you depend very much on the generosity of the community, city, or the country you take up as a new home. But eventually, there's the desire and hope, and of course, expectations, and unfortunately, sometimes forced to return back that generosity. And as an immigrant, I think a lot about this ongoing process of what is taken for granted, what is expected, and the level of willingness we have for returning back the generosity to the host community and how that process evolves. I also came out to myself, my family, and friends as a gay man right after I moved to the United States. Being out was, and still is not easy in my home country. So thinking back of my new life back then, the gay community was definitely a safe and generous space that I always think about. And of course, when I talk about like space here and also kind of as an architect and talking with a professor of urban anthropology, I'm also referring to the physical spaces that we occupy. And then those physical spaces can be bars, cafes, or other public spaces. But within that gay community, I also remember I immediately felt belonged. But during that time that I moved here, there was also another kind of space emerging. Hold on. In the 90s and early 2000s, there was another type of public space emerging. With the advance of internet, we all were very excited about the digital global communities we have been entering. The idea about internet's transparency, its horizontality, the non-hierarchical and non-mediated structure it promised was fascinating. The ideas around the world being a global village, boundaries being replaced by the belief in the internet's power of democratization, and the non-hierarchical world made us felt the sky was the limit. I do remember spending a lot of time during the early 2000s in AOL chats, trying to connect with the other Muslim gay men from the part of the world I grew up. It felt very exciting. I felt like I belonged to internet. And again, within thinking about this, I just want to bring back a little bit of the architecture and urban space of what was changing. And simultaneously, something was shifting in architecture and urban design as well. When the speed of neoliberal economy met with the advancing of digital technology, we witnessed the race of cities trying to become global and a world-class city. Previously, if architecture and urban design and architects were more concerned with welfare, social housing, and the social infrastructures around housing like community centers and etc., now the focus was to provide platform for capitalist expression. Of course, this kind of like in the past 20 years, we have seen these kind of images, like the image of like this icon of phantasmatic architecture that were accustomed to like architecture that was still to a unique form as the icon for an organization or even the city. You probably know the one on the left-hand side, the Bilbao Guggenheim. On the right-hand side is the CCTV in Beijing by OMA. And what is really amazing about in the past 20 years, we see architecture start becoming like this image. Of kind of these complex forms like that's flattened to an image. And at the same time, there was also the growing inequality of public space in contemporary cities. In the era of neoliberal urbanism, stratified economic and cultural resources provide a spectrum of unevenly developed public parks, ranging from elite privatized public space in wealthy districts to neglected parks in poor neighborhoods. An example of it is that in the past 20 years, of course, a big portion of the urban parks has been developed in the west side of Manhattan mainly, and you can see here the High Line and the west side Highway Park. What is really kind of like strikes me about all of these things simultaneously happening is that what happened in the last 2 decades is how the communities that provided generosity to us started to disappear in the physical world, but seamlessly emerge in the digital world. And I believe something has also shifted in the act of generosity and of sharing. The act of aiming to enhance the well-being of others and strangers shifted to the act of enhancing the well-being of the similar or the self. Around the time of the 2016 elections and afterwards, we've witnessed the limits of internet's transparency, its horizontal and so-called non-hierarchical and non-mediated structure. We have all realized the echo chambers that we have been living in. And it's kind of very interesting because from the vision of internet being this endless, horizontal, limitless world, all of a sudden turned into this kind of folding on top of ourselves and creating these echo chambers is kind of like something fascinating, and that's why I hopefully want to talk about the importance of physical spaces come here. I've been hearing the term echo chambers for a while, but it didn't really register to me how it can apply to design, until I got an invitation in 2018 for contributing to the publication of Sharjah Biennial 14. The biennial opened in March 2016 and was titled Leaving the Echo Chambers, created by Omar Khalif, Zoe Baud, and Claire Tankuns. The creators were looking at how to renegotiate the echo chamber of contemporary life and how artists can give us clues on navigating the path. I actually really love this quote from the director of the Sharjah Art Foundation for the foreword of the publication for the biennial. In the context of the biennial, the echo chambers encompasses the noises of mainstream media coverage, conspiracy theories, sensationalized storytelling, and social media feeds that reverberates within closed systems and networks that prevent people from engaging with each other in complex ways. The exhibition opened with a 3-day conference called March Meetings, where artists, curators, writers, academics, and designers presented and discussed their work. And I was very fortunate. I was invited to present the Cultural Center project that we were working on and later published in the book. And it occurred to me through this invitation that physical public spaces are crucial in current times to provide alternatives to the digital spaces that we are occupying. And this is where I'm really excited to have the conversation with Setha, because the necessity of the act of negotiating in physical spaces doesn't necessarily happen in the digital world. Physical public spaces in cities are one of the few places where we have the chance to run into and meet different point of views, negotiate ideas, and move beyond the silos we are living in. Activating public spaces, encouraging different cultures, classes, political views to work out differences and learn to be generous is something that's core to, I think, both my and Setha's work. And I'm very excited to kind of have this discussion with you and Setha, because something that is really crucial about like in public spaces that we can't kind of escape from other people. We need to have that uncomfortable moments to negotiate our ideas, and that's actually really crucial for our democracy right now. And in that note, I actually want to give the microphone to Setha so that Setha can talk about her work.
Okay, so are we going to switch? So I can
yes,
move the...
I'm going to do that.
Okay.
No, oops.
Just a second while we switch off.
Here we go.
Okay.
You can use this.
Oh, okay, great. So, hello. Thank you for those wonderful opening words. Echo chambers, you know, that's... I use the word interiority. That's the word that I've been thinking about a lot. Interior worlds, and we used to call it cocooning, but it's much more than that now. And I think you're really onto something. I hadn't really thought it as totally out of what happens with the virtual, but of course that may be part of it. But then the question is that also happening in our physical spaces? And what can we do about it, I guess? Let's see. So I wanted to just take a few minutes to talk about my own work and see if it helps us in this conversation of generosity, which I like much better than the terms that we actually use as academics. I need to start simply by saying that this is based on about 35 years of research, and this book took about 7 years to write. So it has lots of different pieces, and I certainly don't have time to say too much about it. But it starts with the premise that public space should be for everyone, and that it's an opportunity for social interaction, especially among people who wouldn't normally encounter one another. And I've listed here some of the theories of human connection, the importance of spontaneous interaction and problem solving to kind of create the kind of publicness. And we might come back to some of those ideas of how is it that we foment publicness. And there are lots of theories and lots of debate about how we might do that. But for today, I just thought I'd walk you through a little bit of what I found and what I think might be important as our base, as a way to start collectively. And I developed a little model, and I want you to just look at the median variables. Sorry for the scientific ease, but this is for the psychologists in the room. We all know that public spaces have antecedents, and then I'm going to talk about the positive outcomes. That's what we're trying to do here today. How can we make public spaces create all the things they do to create flourishing life? And there's been an incredible amount of research on what makes public spaces actually successful, or what makes them really work. And those three elements were the three that I decided really made the most sense together if we want to really think about a public space, and I would argue ultimately its generosity. And it starts with contact, no surprise. All of you know that contact is really the basis of public space. But I don't know if you're aware that there's over 60 years of research that demonstrates that contact can have a liberalizing influence on all of us. It creates an environment of much greater tolerance and acceptance. It can go so far as to create greater flexibility, creativity, opening up ideologies, broadening worldviews. And that wasn't something we always knew. There were tremendous debates. In a way, public space is overall a liberalizing agent in a kind of classic view of that, in that it operates with a lot of other things that are going on, like street life in our streets. And psychologists are now thinking that encounter, any kind of contact, is much more basic to humans than we ever thought before. And any of us who lived through COVID now probably know that that's true, I think, if there was ever any doubt. So it's pretty well established that the most important thing that happens in public space is contact. That's its main function. But we also know that lots and lots of public spaces and streets and plazas and parks don't work at all with just contact. Contact in and of itself is not enough. And so I sort of began to develop this concept of public culture. And actually, this is the plaza where I did my initial research in Costa Rica. Public culture is what I think we really need to be focusing on. It's a concept that's arguing that there's a dynamic negotiation, a kind of building of being together whenever we're together in public space. Doesn't matter whether we're here in the church or in Sag Harbor or in the street, or whether we're on a playground or we're walking in all of these spaces. People being together is created through the negotiation and sort of rules and pushing up against one another that begins to form something we call public culture, which seems stable, not very stable, often always changing if you think about a park or think about a plaza, actually. But it seems as if it offers a way for people to be comfortable to be together. But it always involves some kind of contestation and struggle, some kind of conflict. It isn't always, ideally it's often, but it isn't always community building, collaboration, or the social construction of meaning. And that in this dynamic of negotiation, out of it comes a kind of public culture that then mediates, moves between public space and the public sphere. And by public sphere, I mean like politics, the politics of today. So that this thing that we build every day in all of our lives and every place we go, that I'm calling public culture because I'm doing it out there, that actually also mediates our politics. And that's why I think it's so critical. And I think it's part of what makes a successful public space, because when there is a kind of public culture, and you can feel it when you go in, that people are figuring out ways of being together, it really works. On the other hand, I think there's one more component, and I've called it affective atmosphere. I've apologized before for this very academic-y term. If you want to think of a new term for me, I would be deeply appreciative. That's me in Kenya and Dandora talking to people about the public spaces they've created. So where did it come from? Well, originally there was a study of Victorian parks in which a colleague of mine, Anna Barker, found that affective atmosphere could make a difference for conviviality. That's a term used in the UK, and she's working in Leeds. And she's found over and over again that a positive affective atmosphere was central to people feeling connected, to feeling really comfortable. An affective atmosphere, though, can come from anything. It can come from an event. I always use it. Joel is in the audience, always gives me the example of you're in the Yankee Stadium parking lot and the Yankees have won. What does it feel like? How do people interact in the parking lot? They touch each other, they hug each other, they talk to each other. What happens when they lose? Everyone's very quiet, they pull into each other. It's an affective atmosphere. And why do I think it's so important? Well, a positive affective atmosphere can, we now know, contribute to conviviality and the interaction. I still would argue that you need a supportive and egalitarian kind of public culture to support that affect. I'm not trying to say that, just if it's a happy place, it's going to work. I think that all of these three elements, contact, public culture, and affective atmosphere, work together. And this is, of course, where the architect and the designer is really key, in that to have a public culture and to have particularly a positive, if at all possible, but a positive or a creative or a generous, I would even argue, affective atmosphere, these are elements that can be designed in or can be thought through, and they can be created by individuals themselves through activation, which was the other idea that we talked about today, and why we might have a dinner in the garden today. All right, so I'm going to move a little, so that's a general idea. If you have this kind of public space, there's all kinds of wonderful outcomes that are produced. And everything, and most importantly, social justice and democratic practices. This is based on a study at Jones Beach. Many of you know Jones Beach. And this man is saying, people are out with family and friends. It's a diverse place. I feel welcome here. He says, this is America. And then these young men from they're actually from Southeast Asia, but they are living, and they're saying, oh, not here, excuse me, I'm sorry. This man from El Salvador said, I finally felt like I belonged in the country. We played in the ocean with hundreds of other folks. Somehow this made me feel special. Is that a space of generosity? Is feeling special or belonging? Is it part of the social justice and democratic belonging? And Jones Beach also demonstrated the importance of recognition of difference. And this is the one example I was beginning to tell you, that this group of young men from Valley Stream were telling me, nobody looks at you because of your color. Or someone else says to you, there are all kinds of families here, that New Yorkers are tolerant, that these kinds of public spaces can, in fact, be places of belonging and recognition of difference where so many are not in, especially the immigrants' life here in New York City. I think there's no question now that we know that public space contributes to health and well-being. I think that the question is exactly how. In our research on Walkway across the Hudson, which is a train trestle that's been redesigned so you can walk back and forth between Poughkeepsie and Highland, on the Hudson River, people talk about how they feel the wind in the air, they look at the water, they look at the beauty, and it completely changes their relationship to working out. I think most of us who go into a park or a public space could argue is one of the secrets of health and well-being, that public spaces offer a place to recognize one another, but also a place to really get out of the house, get out of the gym, and feel better. But we also know from COVID and also from my own research on this that mental health is heavily influenced by the use of public space when people are using these spaces as a place to think, a place to make sense of my life. If you do any kind of interviewing in any kind of public space in your own life, or ask someone what they're doing, you will be astonished by how often people will talk about being able to relax, being able to reflect, being able to see themselves for the first time. Now, for some people, this is not so easy to achieve at home. This is a study of Lake Welch, which is near Bear Mountain in New York. And these are lots and lots of people who live in the Bronx, mostly Spanish-speaking. And it's about a 45-minute drive away. And they come almost every Saturday and Sunday, and always on Sunday. And they say that they come because it's so important for the play and recreation of their children. We're going to talk, hopefully, a little bit about play and its importance. But they also say that this is a place they can socialize their children freely. The kids can go from group to group. They hear Spanish. They hear everybody accepts them. They can play freely and feel like they can mingle with one another. People can come and feel as if they're free. And what's more important is there's really only one day on Sunday where they can do this, and the public space then offers the capacity for multiple people to come together. And I think, again, we don't think about the importance of public space for gathering of larger groups of people who may, in fact, in the city, as you'll see here, where they may live in very small apartments, where the streets of the Bronx, in particular during COVID, were not places that people could be with one another. This is a middle-aged Spanish-speaking woman. She said, one could get the stress off by relaxing with others here. And then she goes, this place gives me the chance to clear my mind, despejarse. She says, we like the beach, the water. We live closed in a room, encerrados. Here we get to go out. I mean, again, I use this just as a brief example, but I want to tell you that I have heard this over and over and over again, and about this sense of relaxation and release and how critical it is for so many people. Now, a couple of things we don't think about, I think, as often about public spaces. It's a workplace. This is a cartonero from Argentina. He's picking up trash. 60% of the world make their living in informal spaces. What does that mean? It means they work in public spaces. That's the streets and the sidewalks and the parks and the plazas. These are their workplaces. These are necessary in every way possible. But it's not just, if any of you recognize this photograph, we are in Sag Harbor. This was taken in East Hampton. Public spaces are the places also to build social capital and networks and the relationships that ultimately allow immigrants or help immigrants or enable immigrants or provide a space for those who are employed only on a daily basis to meet one another, to build relations, and lead to more formal jobs and integration. Without public spaces, which include markets in this case, and train stations, which I've studied, and bus stations, which I've studied, so multiple forms of public space are hubs of innovation, creativity, and need to be included in our notion of generosity to all. I don't know, I think all I can say is, of course, public spaces offer are one of the big urban answers to sustainability in the future. If we designed our cities around public spaces, particularly green spaces, we could change the nature of new cities. If anyone asks me what was the biggest intervention, what is the most important intervention I can make, I would argue to create a garden. Why? Because it gives you every single benefit of a public space all in one place. It's social cohesion, food, economics, you can sell the food, intergenerational relationship, cultural memory, cultural identity, creativity, ecosystem support of the water and the refurnishing. I think that gardens and gardening strategies are critical when we think about ecological sustainability and the role of public space, as well as sustainable parks, which up till now have not fulfilled their promise. Often being a kind of design ploy, often being used more from a discursive point of view, more symbolically than really changing the ecological contours or the ecological, sort of the water retention, wildlife corridors, soil enrichment. And also, remember, these sustainable communities also help us to think more about collective governance, which is also part of public space, and thinking about how do we as groups take care of ourselves, take care of the land. And finally, cultural identity and place attachment. Public spaces are where most of us, many of us, practice the rituals of everyday life, the cultural traditions of everyday life with our families and friends in naturalist settings. This is from Prospect Park. It's a cultural representation of an offering to the Grand Bois, if those of you who know Prospect Park, down by the drumming circle by the Haitian community that lives nearby. But these cultural practices and traditions also create place attachment. And it is through place attachment Again, a concept that I think is critical when we think about public space, that we begin to think more about caring about one another and caring about the space itself. And finally, community cohesion. I don't use that term so much now as I did in the book 2 years ago. What does that really mean? But these are slides of Battery Park City after 9/11, over the 20 years post 9/11, where community was rebuilt. Community is often built in our public spaces, and like having our dinner in the garden tonight, I hope that it'll be by activating the space through play, through that cohesion and solidarity is built, again, piece by piece. I don't think I'm going to go, I was going to talk about all things that go wrong, but you already mentioned that. I'm going to stop there and go back to Koray.
Great. This is great. I'm just going to maybe just quickly go through 4 of the projects just to give you an idea like what kind of
Yeah, this was just telling you what could go wrong. And I think he was already showing you slides of that.
Great. Again, some of the work that you will see that most of them is temporary projects, and this idea is about wonder, informality, playfulness, strange and familiar are the concepts that you will see like coming again in this project. The first project that I'm going to present to you is that this was a competition that we were invited to. It was doing a temporary installation in Madison Square Park in 2016. Madison Square Park is in Lower Manhattan. It's where Broadway, 5th Avenue, and 23rd Street meets. This is the Madison Square Park is the park that you can see on the right, and the kind of the triangle that you have there, it was the site that was given to us. This installation was proposed to be between Thanksgiving and Christmas, so there was this kind of idea of like holiday season. And we were kind of thinking about what can we do about the holiday season and like the public space. So I do kind of have the sense that design has the power to create a sense of belonging, joy, and an ownership of public space. And it was kind of something that we were thinking about how it can be done. I do love how kids play in parks. They always, like, even though they don't know each other, they need each other to play in the parks. That's something that we were really interested in. And this teeter is a kind of an example that I love. And also this idea about like rocking chairs, that we always kind of this idea about a space of contemplating and having conversation. So our proposal was actually, what if we combine these 2 things together? It's basically a huge rocking chair. It has, let me see if it has ramps on both sides, and then you enter from the middle. Both sides has these big seating that when you sit down, there's springs underneath it that makes the piece start moving. And the idea is that the kind of design provides a sense of familiarity between strangers in public while being playful, which is the essence of the core proposal. Flat Island Rock Chair is a large-scale public rocking chair during the day. As passerbys enter and sit down, the piece rocks up and down, animating the holiday spirit. And at night, in a fixed upright position, the piece transforms into a stage where festive chorus will perform. And the design aims for the neighborhood to visit the rock chair regularly, to enjoy the movement during the daytime and listen to a program of chorus at night, and for the piece to create a community around it throughout the holiday season. And this is like a shot of the day, why it's the chair, and the one on the right is the nighttime. We were invited right after that in 2018 to do another installation. This time it was in Times Square. It was called the Valentine Heart installation. It is done every year during the February. It is for, the idea was like to celebrate the Valentine Day. And it is in Times Square this time, the location on Broadway and 43rd and 44th Street. These are the previous winners of the installation. And like, as you can see, there's a lot of like, kind of like thinking around the shape of heart as a sculpture, kind of tongue-in-cheek again. And these are some of the studies that we did in the office during that time. We had a lot of laser-cut heart floating around in our office. But something that really struck to us is that we end up choosing the one that is on the right bottom. My office is also composed of first-generation immigrants, and for us as immigrants to love requires to belong, and belonging drives from expression, recognition, and ownership. The design is a gesture for belonging. Times Square is both an intersection of major streets of Manhattan and the crossroads of the world. The form and the function of the design highlights these qualities. The installation is comprised of two 22 feet long and 11 feet height walls intersecting in the middle at 90 degrees. The center of both walls has a heart shape cut out, creating four intersections with a heart shape in the middle. Either side of the both walls are covered with a skin of reversible screens. One side of the skin is finished with brushed metal and the other a mirrored red metal. As visitors brush their hands over the skin, the sequins flip from one side to the other, creating an interactive wall, as well as allowing people to write words on both sides of the heart. The design invites visitors to express their life, ranging from the names of loved ones to statement of passion. And these are some renderings of that proposal. This is like one of the last two things that I'm going to show. This is actually a proposal that we did with an artist Carlos Mato. Carlos was invited to do a proposal for the plinth on High Line. The shape that you see is actually on the left is the pink triangle from the ECTAB, the famous for the famous sign. The drawing that you see on the right is of Agnes Martin. One thing that's not known, Agnes Martin is a very famous painter, and she, during her time in the 50s and 60s, supported a lot of the LGBTQ community that nobody else knew, and during that time, she was not able to talk about it because it was a scandal. And Carlos was really inspired by her generosity to the gay community. The plinth is on High Line when it crosses through as a bridge on 30th Street. And these are the previous commissions that you've probably seen. It is actually on the bridge as you go underneath the 10th Avenue. These are the past winners that the work. The plinth itself is right under these sculptures, and the sculpture basically sits on it. One thing that Carlos didn't want is that he didn't want just an object. He did want what he calls a public sculpture. And that's why he invited me as collaborator, and also another friend, Ted Kerr, who is an AIDS historian and also a creator. The idea for there is that one thing that Carlos has been thinking a lot, he's a Latin American artist, and thinks and talks a lot about gay activism. And one of the things that he was really bothered in New York and big cities in the United States is about this idea, like how AIDS history was represented. So his idea was to make this kind of an anti-AIDS memorial. For him, the problem was that AIDS history starts in the United States in 1981 when they called the patient zero, which was a white man a man who came to the United States, contracted AIDS. Whereas AIDS has been in the history in Africa since the beginning of 20th century, late 19th century, and there's a big history before 1981 within the colored communities around the world and in the United States, but that was never recognized, that he was find it very problematic. So the idea that we came up with was these two big formal gestures to Agnes Martin and the pink triangle. When you look from the 10th Avenue, these actually looks flat, but what they are is that they are actually these banded shapes that create this framework for the plinth. And we purposefully left the plinth empty. The idea was that the plinth was the void so that people from these communities can go up in the stage and fill that void with these alternative histories that was never been told. These were some study models that we did about this work, like how it can create this public space around it. And this was how it will look. And while you are on 10th Avenue, it will look completely flat and give you that image of that pure sculpture. And what Ted did which was amazing, is that a part of the budget went to this like year-long programming about how to recognize these communities and how to work and bring them into the space for them to kind of belong to the history of AIDS crisis and as well as belong to the space. The last thing that I want to show you is like what I was sketching here, I was in the past 10 days, some kind of ideas that kind of like want to think about. One thing that kind of fascinates me about like Sag Harbor and also the church is this idea of all these gates, fences, all these fences. Even though the fence that you see here is very transparent, that you can look through and pass through, but it has a very historical recognition. It is a very kind of a privilege, a certain type of like architecture, domestic architecture it refers to. So I started thinking about like what are the other ways that we can activate this space and that make feel more belong to the community or invite the community here. These are very quick sketches. I just want to also give a disclaimer. This is the residency here is a way that nobody like touches you. You can do whatever you want. So I'm going to show you some sketches. These are not like, I'm not hired by church to do any of these. These are just like kind of like free thinking. One of the ideas that I have that I always love in parks, these free libraries, like people like put their books and that you can grab. So what if this fence turns into these kind of benches and these free libraries so that people can just drop books or pick it up? And I kind of like, rather than a gate that kind of like shows that it's open, maybe a part of this, like there can be a big gesture of a part of it just opens up when the space is open so that it kind of is more inviting for people. So this was one idea. Then I was talking with Jeremy, who is the director of Ma House in Hamptons, which a nonprofit that actually has artist residence and exhibition space for Native American artists and also BIPOC artists. One of the things that he mentioned, and which also Setha mentioned, is that for a lot of the communities in East End that we don't recognize, again, this idea of public space as a means of commercial support, as Setha mentioned, was something interesting. Another idea came to my mind, what if we created a fence that's at the top, you can see it might be flat during night, but actually these are fold-up spaces where people can actually use to sell things that they created, you know, and then the way they can move in and out can create like passages through them for people to kind of go through to use the park, but at the same time to the garden, but at the same time it gives the opportunity to some of these communities to kind of informally, create this informal economy. I also was talking about this, I think there's a lot of controversy sometimes in Sag Harbor in the sense of like what can be touched and not touched. You know, it's like and this kind of idea of that kind of sounds very interesting, like this gate, the fence itself is also very precious. Other fences are also very precious. So I thought that, you know, another thing that I thought might be tongue-in-cheek is Bill Gates once taught that if you want to kind of alleviate poverty, you just give like the family like 2 chickens and a coop. So I thought that what if like this whole fence can turn into a chicken coop where the chickens can freely run in the garden, but at the same time maybe people walking by can just freely get the eggs from the chickens. On that note, I just want to kind of thank you so much. I think maybe Setha, if you want to come here and we can have a conversation.
So we're open for questions? Yeah. We're hoping to hear your ideas, right?
Please, yeah.
First of all, thank you for the okay. Here we go. Thank you for the presentation. It was amazing. Previous to being an artist, was an urban planner for the city of New York in Lower Manhattan. So I was definitely lots of light bulbs going off for me, and I thought it was really insightful. I guess I had a question about, I love this idea of generosity, and you know, a lot of the examples that both of you point to were of generous spaces were of you know, publicly owned public spaces that are owned by the government and maintained by the government, and maybe, you know, so I love that there's a trust or something of concerned citizens that also help to maintain. But, you know, the reality, especially in New York, is that a lot of the new public spaces that are being developed are privately owned public spaces, or POPs, as we call them in the biz. So how do we, is it possible to code for generosity? Is that something that can be developed for, these spaces are usually very, I would say, ungenerous. It's like ticking boxes of, are there chairs? Are there trees? And not really thinking about how are people coming together and the effective atmosphere, which I think the word I'm suggesting is vibe. For the vibe instead of effective atmosphere.
Okay,
the vibe.
I like that.
I think that's the word. So that was my question.
That's great, the vibe.
We both have plenty to say about. I just got a call yesterday from a young man who's here from the UK looking at POPs and what privately owned public spaces. And he's doing a really smart thing. He's looking at them at different periods of time, sort of from the in Manhattan, in the 1960s, in 75, 76, when there was a change, and then more recently, trying to look at the legislation. And exactly what the rules and regulations are for architects and what the intentions were, to see if he could tease out why there's such hostile spaces. And yet, what I pointed out to him, based on a study just done by the New York City, I think 2 years ago in 23, in collaboration with the New York Times, is almost all of the current POPs are full of rubbish or gated off or being used for coffee shops or filled with things that shouldn't be there, like benches and whatever, that there is, with all of the work and all the and then you can they list all the citations of all the POPs. People had noticed that and they hadn't done anything about it. So, if we want POPs to work, it's going to take some, I think, really rethinking the legislation of what it is and what it's about and what it's for, and I'm not going to go through, but I also think that we have to ask the question is, can a POP be a space of generosity? A man named Matthew Carmona, who's a very important urban planner, do you know him? Okay, Matthew Carmona, small world. Yes, I knew you would love this man. All right. I'm ambivalent about this man. Okay. So anyhow, but Matthew's probably, in charge of really trying to rethinking privatization of public space in London. And we don't tend to agree only because I try to do research on the impact of privatization. But Matthew's saying we're stuck with it and that we're going to have to live with it and that we're going to have to find ways of legislating or monitoring or new forms of private governance that work. What my only problem is that all the research I do, and I look at a lot of these, I've never seen a form of private governance that utterly works, because it needs to be some kind of collective governance. And private ownership and collective governance, they're kind of at odds. And so we have there's a fundamental problem here, anyhow.
Maybe one thing though is that after COVID, something started, the Department of Parks is doing a lot, is that, there needs to be a partnership, and the BITs work well with the public spaces because it's economically better for them. If the streets are clean, if there's people want to be in that street, it means that they will also shop there, hang out there, they will spend money. But if you don't have that kind of economical incentive, then nobody wants to care of the public space, but some parts of parks and Bronx, Queens, and Long Island City now, the park department is trying to partner with a nonprofit or an organization where they give the tools, I will give you these set of tools like benches, tables, and things for 5 years. This will be an experiment. If you can take care of this public space, then we will invest on it and turn it into a public space. So I don't know how well it works, but I do know I work with now MoMA PS1, and the triangle in front of it is now something that MoMA PS1 is in charge of. if there's nonprofits like that in other parts, I think that might be a way to go. But there needs to be a local community leader that has to spend time and energy.
Right, and some of the local community leaders that I hear from in the Bronx don't necessarily sometimes, they feel that then the burden is on them and to produce the money, and they don't really have the ability. So some communities, again, are going to be able to or not. I mean, this is one of the biggest things facing us if the public sector doesn't step up. I mean, I'm a believer that we should be spending more money on public space because I don't think there's anything more important to making cities livable, and that's where I'm at. And they need all to be, but to be spaces of generosity, again, based on what I have worked on, is they need to be public. The minute they become private, there are countervailing forces occurring at the same time, and that makes it very hard for whatever you might conceive of everyone to be there, be it teenagers who we want in those spaces, because of tourists and teenagers from black teenagers in particular, let's say, maybe don't mix, or do they? Or is there another way to bring people together in much more complicated ways? I mean, I don't think we've really tried. I don't think we've tried hard enough. I do. I think there's a way out, but there needs to be some willingness on the part of the city to fund something that makes it wonderful.